In 2010, a linguist named Edward Vajda published a paper proving something that historical linguistics had considered essentially impossible. He demonstrated that Keet, a language spoken by approximately 1,000 people along the Yenisei River in central Siberia, is genetically related to the Na-Dene language family of North America. The Na-Dene family includes Navajo. It includes Apache. It includes the Athabascan languages of Alaska and Western Canada. These are Native American languages. Ket is a Siberian language. They are separated by the Bering Strait, by the entire width of Alaska, by 15,000 to 20,000 years of independent development, and they descend from a common ancestor. This is the first proven linguistic connection between a Siberian language and a Native American language family in the history of linguistics. Not proposed, not suggested, proven through specific grammatical correspondences following regular sound change patterns that cannot be explained by coincidence or contact. The paper changed what researchers thought was knowable about the migrations that populated North America. And almost nobody outside the linguistics and genetics literature knows that the people at the center of it exist. Follow the evidence to where they actually live. Follow it north through central Siberia until it empties into the Arctic Ocean. The Ket live along that river in a handful of villages in Krasnoyarsk Krai. Their traditional economy was nomadic reindeer herding and fishing in terrain that most of the world's population would describe as the middle of nowhere. Their language is unrelated to any other language family in Siberia, not Turkic, not Mongolic, not Samoyedic, not Evenki. It is a language isolate that survived the extinction of every cousin language it had. Yug disappeared within living memory. Arin, Asan, Kot, and Pumpakol are gone. Ket is all that remains of an entire language family. And it is the last surviving linguistic thread connecting the old world to the new. Before the genome, I need to slow down on the grammar, because the grammar is what made the connection provable. And the proof is worth understanding precisely. Languages borrow vocabulary from each other constantly. English is full of French words, Spanish is full of Arabic words. Vocabulary borrowing is the expected consequence of contact between speakers of different languages, and it proves nothing about common ancestry. What languages do not borrow is the deep morphological architecture of the verb. The verb template, the complex system of prefixes, suffixes, and infixes that organizes grammatical meaning in a language, reflects the history of the grammar itself, not the history of contact with neighbors. Both Ket and the Na-Dene languages have complex polysynthetic verb systems. They pack an extraordinary amount of grammatical information into single verb forms. And the specific structures within those systems, the specific positions of specific grammatical elements, following specific patterns of sound change across the lexicon, show correspondences in Vajda's analysis that meet the standard of proof in historical linguistics. These are not coincidences. They are the inherited debris of a proto-language that both families descended from, preserved in the morphology across 15,000 to 20,000 years of separation, because verb systems are where the oldest grammar lives. When Vajda's paper was published, the University of Alaska dedicated a volume to it. The response from the field was not controversy, but confirmation. Other linguists examined the correspondences and found them robust. The Dene-Yeniseian connection is now the consensus position. The Navajo and the Ket have a common ancestor. The grammar says so. The genome says so too, and the way it says it is worth examining separately. What surprised me about the biological confirmation is how independent it is. The geneticists studying Ket DNA were not working from Vajda's paper. They were working from haplogroup distributions. Y chromosome haplogroup Q is the dominant male line signature in Native American populations, particularly elevated in Na-Dene speakers. It appears at elevated frequencies in the Ket. The maternal haplogroup patterns show specific ancestral connections to populations that contributed to Native American founding lineages. Two separate scientific disciplines, two separate methodologies, two separate evidence bases, both pointing in the same direction, both arriving at the same ancient Siberian relationship. But the genome revealed something about the Ket that the language alone could not have predicted, something that made me reconsider the scale of what this story actually is. In the 1920s, Soviet archaeologists excavating near a Siberian village called Malta on the Angara River, not far from Lake Baikal, found the burial of a young boy. He had been placed in the ground with elaborate grave goods, carved figurines, pendants, a necklace of drilled animal teeth. The burial dated to approximately 24,000 years ago, during the last glacial maximum, when the northern hemisphere was at its coldest and Siberian populations were among the most stressed on Earth. He sat in a museum collection for decades. In 2013, researchers extracted his genome. The Malta child belonged to a population that geneticists named the Ancient North Eurasians, a population that was distinct from the East Asian-derived populations that later expanded across most of Siberia, a population that contributed ancestry to the early migrants who crossed into North America. And here is where the story becomes something other than a story about Siberia and America. The Ancient North Eurasian genetic signal appears in modern Native Americans at approximately 30% of their founding ancestry. It also appears in modern Europeans, arriving through the Yamnaya steppe migrations of 5,000 years ago, at between 15 and 40% depending on the population. Europe and Native America share a Siberian ancestor from 20,000 years ago. A boy buried near Lake Baikal during the Ice Age is the best documented individual from that ancestral population, and the Ket carry higher proportions of ancient North Eurasian ancestry than almost any other modern population on Earth. This is the triangle. 1,000 people on the Yenisei River sit at the genetic center of a relationship connecting the Navajo of New Mexico, the founding ancestry of modern Europeans, and a ghost population from 20,000 years ago whose genome was sitting in a Soviet museum waiting to be sequenced. The Ket are not related to the Navajo and to Europeans through some generalized ancient human connection. They are specifically related through the ancient North Eurasian population they carry in the highest living concentration, in ways that are measurable and documentable and unlike the relationship between any other pair of modern populations. A person of European descent carries some of the same ancestral signal that is concentrated in the Ket. A Navajo person carries it through the founding population that the Ket's ancestors were part of before the Na-Dene speakers crossed into North America. These are not metaphors. They are specific frequencies in specific haplogroups traceable to specific ancient populations through specific migration events. The genetic significance of 1,000 people on a Siberian river is not proportional to their population size. What was done to that population across the last century is the part of this story I find hardest to set aside once I have understood what was being destroyed. The Soviet Union in the 1930s classified small indigenous Siberian peoples through a specific administrative lens: backward peoples, primitive economies requiring modernization, local languages as obstacles to socialist development rather than as repositories of knowledge, or as irreplaceable archives of human history. The Ket community numbered approximately 1,200 people when collectivization reached their villages. The nomadic reindeer herding and fishing economy was dismantled. The children were sent to boarding schools. The schools prohibited the use of a Ket. The language lost its transmission pathway in a single generation. This was not a unique policy applied specifically to the Ket. It was a general policy applied across the Soviet Arctic that produced similar outcomes for dozens of small indigenous language communities across Siberia. The Ket happened to be the community whose language holds something that no other policy victim holds. The only proven linguistic bridge between the Old World and the New World was one of the languages the boarding school system was designed to replace with Russian. What the system was actually dismantling is the part I did not fully understand until I went looking at what the language was built around. The boarding school system was not targeting a grammar archive. It was targeting a world the language had been built to describe. The Ket cosmology runs vertically. An upper world governed by S, the sky deity, the creator, the force associated with warmth and seasons. A middle world of the Yenisei, the forest, daily life. A lower world governed by Kosadam, a white-haired figure from the north associated with cold and illness and death. Shaman called the Senning traveled between these layers on behalf of the community using a drum and specific ritual language that exists in Ket and nowhere else. The bear held a position in this world that required a specific ceremony after every kill. The bones had to be preserved intact, not one broken, no marrow carelessly removed, because the bear's spirit needed an intact skeleton to return. Specific songs, specific objects, specific prohibitions governing who could speak and what could be said. The knowledge of all of it was transmitted orally in Ket to the people responsible for maintaining it. The Doe narratives, stories of the culture hero who negotiates between S and Kosadam, are not folklore in the way the Russian curriculum would have classified them. They are a practical guide to living in the Yenisei Valley. which places along the river carry spiritual risk at which times of year, which actions invite Kosadam's attention, which responses are required when the natural order breaks unexpectedly. The genome preserves the biology. The language preserved the cosmology, the ceremony, the navigation knowledge, the specific names for the spirits of specific bends in the Yenisei. Those are not the same archive. Only one of them is still recoverable. The numbers make that concrete. The number of fluent first language speakers is fewer than 10. The remaining semi-speakers and passive speakers are themselves aging. Linguists have been working in urgent documentation mode for 2 decades. The grammars exist. The dictionaries exist. The audio archives exist. Edward Vajda's paper exists in part because earlier linguists documented the language while there were still speakers available to work with. The documentation is not complete. It was never going to be complete. Living languages always exceed what any documentation of them captures. The specific debate still ongoing in the Dene-Yeniseian literature, about which Ket verb forms correspond to which Na-Dene forms, about the reconstructed phonology of the proto-language, about specific morphological correspondences that have been proposed but not yet fully tested, require living speakers to resolve. The archives can answer the questions that researchers have already asked. They cannot answer the questions that have not yet been formulated. Historical linguistics advances when new questions are asked of living languages. Vajda found the Dene-Yeniseian connection because Ket was still living when he looked for it. The researchers who come after Vajda with new questions will find a documented language. What they will not find is a living one. This is the distinction I keep returning to. Any Ket person willing to provide a sample contributes to research that can continue indefinitely. The biological archive is not endangered. The ancient North Eurasian signal in Ket DNA can be measured and analyzed regardless of whether anyone on the Yenisei River still speaks Ket. Genetic triangular connecting the Navajo, European genome, and the ancient North Eurasians will remain demonstrable from the genome alone. The linguistic bridge is different. The morphological evidence that proved the Old World and the New World share a linguistic ancestor is preserved in documentation. It is not preserved in the way that a living language is preserved, with the capacity to answer new questions, resolve ongoing debates, extend the analysis further than the existing documentation reaches. The Yeniseian family lost Yug, Arin, Asan, Kot, and Pumpakol before anyone understood what the family held. Ket survived long enough for Vajda to find the connection. Whether it survives long enough for the next generation of questions to be asked of a living speaker is a different calculation. Edward Vajda published his paper in 2010. The Ket speakers who made it possible, the elders who worked with linguists across Soviet and post-Soviet decades to leave enough documentation for the correspondences to be found, are almost entirely gone. The paper they made possible changed the field of historical linguistics. It changed how researchers model the migrations that populated North America. It connected a Siberian river to a Navajo language spoken in New Mexico. The Yenisei is in the paper. The Navajo verb system is in the paper. The ancient North Eurasian signal in the European genome is in the genome database. The Malta child is in the museum. The boarding school records are in the Soviet archive. 1,000 people still alive on the Yenisei River carry the genome that no other living population holds in the same concentration. The ancient Siberian ancestry that contributed to both continents simultaneously, preserved in a community that history has had every reason to overlook and the science has found every reason to study. If you know someone who has spent time with the Navajo Nation, or who studies linguistics, or who has been quietly carrying a question about where Na-Dene languages came from, this is the video they have been waiting for without knowing it existed. Send it to them directly, leave what is open for you in the comments. Subscribe. The Yenisei River goes further than this video followed it, and I am nowhere near done. Thanks for watching.